All right, Les, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about having you on. We've been able to talk offline and it seemed like we had a lot to talk about. So I'm glad we're here where we can record. But before we jump into our conversation, I'm definitely interested in your background and some of the work you've been doing, which we'll definitely cover in our conversation. I want to hand it over to you and give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here today and who you are.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a big question. I'm not sure exactly where to start with it, but I've spent my life pretty much being a translator between direct ideas and working people. I design educational programs for working people on how the economy works and doesn't work. And I've pretty much been doing that since the mid-1970s. I went to college at Oakland College in Ohio, went to graduate school at Princeton, but I really wasn't an academic. I was more of an organizer type, but I didn't like to do just pure organizing. I wanted to have a little more content. So I got into designing educational programs. And that's what I do. I design them both for me to use and for many other people to use. And one of my claims to fame is we've developed a method by which we train working people to be their own trainers. So we have programs all over the country where workers conduct the programs themselves using a non-lecture method that we call the small group activity method. So that's kind of my professionalism. Along the way, in the fall of 75, we started this institute called the Labor Institute in New York. I was sort of a co-founder. I eventually became the director. And I've really been there ever since. And the idea was to try to develop programs that could spread through the American trade union movement and beyond. Somehow or another, we've been able to keep this little place going. But during the process of all this, at age 60 or so, I twisted my career a little bit and became a writer, not just the administrator of the organization and the fundraiser, et cetera. I added another hat, which I really enjoy, which is I started writing books. And I think I just finished my 6th one. So I found that very rewarding, a way to keep from burning out. Some people find writing, painful, difficult, but for me, it's turned out to be a joy. Who knew? I hated it when I was young, but something changed. And it just goes to show you that some of life's twists and turns are so unpredictable. This one, very unpredictable.
Thank you for sharing all that. Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm just curious. And the reason why I ask, because writing has been very therapeutic for me. When I'm working through something difficult, I will tend to explore and write about it. And this is something I've been doing in the last couple of years. And like I said, it's been very helpful for me. But I'm curious to understand from your perspective, how does one become a writer? So it's very interesting that you said it was something that you perhaps struggled with early in life. But how do you just pick up writing?
I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
It's very close to your therapeutic answer. I was involved in a very big campaign in the 1980s in a little town in New Jersey, USA, called Freehold. It happened to be the hometown of Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
The superstar.
Yes.
A factory that made a 3M factory that made tape for music studios shut down. And Springsteen was really moving up to the height of his popularity. And the local president of this local union that was going to disappear said, "Hey, I want you to write a letter to Bruce Springsteen and see if you'll help us in this campaign." And lo and behold, I did, and he did. And it led to a series of events, including connecting with the Black South African 3M workers who went on strike for half a day and were on TV, and ABC 2020 was covering us. And it was just a huge thing. And it was running 24 hours a day. And the only way I could stay sane is I started writing it up in the mornings. I started telling the story of how all this happened. And it was a really great experience. A very interesting thing happened though. They asked me, the strengths team management asked me to share with their agent, who told me, hey, you're a good writer, but we can't let you write this. It's too revealing.
Yeah.
So I put it aside. A year later, the assistant manager to Bruce Springsteen gave me a call. She said, whatever happened to that book? I said, your agent told me not to write it. She said, oh, you shouldn't have listened to her. You should have written it anyway. You would have had a bestseller. But anyway, the time had passed. It was kind of too late to do it. I didn't want to do it. But then I realized, though, there was something about writing that was really therapeutic for me. Excuse me, one sec.
Yeah.
So sorry. Then later on, my mentor, a guy named Tony Mazzocchi, a labor guy, passed away, pancreatic cancer. And I've been interviewing him in the last year of his life when he had cancer about his whole life story, which is an amazing story. And I had all these tapes, and it dawned on me, hey, somebody should write his life up. So I started writing. I got we transcribed the tapes, and I started working a story, and it was so much fun. I hate to say, my friend had to die for me to really enjoy it. So this is my second time into it, but this time I just kept going.
Yeah.
And I found that the book was writing itself. It was pulling me along. It was an experience. It was an out-of-body experience. I never had anything like this before. Mm-hmm. And I realized this is for me. Even if I'm not a great writer, I'm not going to be, on the bestseller list. That book is pretty good. It's called The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor. And it, still sells a little bit, and I'm very proud of it. And that once I did that, I said, well, I want to keep writing books. I just kept going from there. Started writing about finance.
Yeah. Yeah. It just shows you not only is it the therapeutic side of the writing, but the whole notion that the pen is mightier than the sword, right? And I think it's powerful to be able to write, especially when you're working through something. But there's another thing that you've touched on here that I would like to explore further, this focus on the working class, and even in the title of the book that you just referred to, Labor Over Work. What about this whole notion of with being closer to working people that you find passion in, and why is it something that you've been drawn to, as you've mentioned?
That's a very good question. My parents were working class immigrants. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in a working class family, in a, kind of a lower middle class where nobody had any money to speak up. So my parents were working hard and struggling just so that I would go to college. They wanted to make sure I wasn't working class. Mm-hmm. So, but that gave me an affinity. And when I was in college and afterwards, I realized the thing I was best, I was a good student. In other words, I could get the good grades, but I didn't like the process. I saw the people around me who were the true academics. Mm-hmm. I have a couple of kids who are true academics. My wife's an academic. I'm not really an academic. And that became a realization. But I did think that if I can understand something, I can get somebody else to understand it, mm-hmm. no matter what their educational background is. So that's when I start. As early as 1972. That's a long time ago. I realized when I was applying to grad school, I actually wrote in my essay, that's what I wanted to do. I knew that when I got to grad school, I wasn't going to, I didn't need to go on to become a professor or anything like that. That wasn't for me. And there's something about just a sense of fairness and justice that we all ought to have. It just seems to me that there are not enough people who are on the side of working people. That should help promote fairness and justice. So it just sucked me in. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a kid of the 1960s. It was a tumultuous period. A lot of people I knew went and tried to become working class fighters, and they went into the plants. But I couldn't do that. That would have been too much of a slap in the face to my parents who struggled so hard for me to get out of that situation. And I had plenty of summer jobs. I knew what that was like. So I knew, factory work wasn't going to be for me. And I just fell into this, created my own job. It didn't exist and nobody else was really doing this. There were some people doing labor education in universities, but doing labor education outside of universities, that was unusual. So we formed a little group and we got lucky that we were able to sustain funding for 50 years. It's like I say that I have trouble, believing that it actually happened. It had a lot of ups and downs. I can tell you, it wasn't a smooth ride. I was on unemployment insurance, 2, 3, 4 times because the funding would go up and down and we'd be unemployed after we raised money. But then things kind of stabilized. Frankly, we got some government grants to do. We got into occupational safety and health, which is a big worker issue. And we got very good at that. And we got very good at training workers to be their own trainers. And nobody quite did it the way we did it. So it kind of spread. We became known for that. And after a while, it gave me the space that when I started writing books, we could afford it as our little institute. I mean, we really are a small thing. What you said about the pen is mightier than the sword. I wish my pen was mightier than the sword. I'm small potatoes, really, in the scheme of things. The writing world is unbelievably hierarchical. I mean, you can write, some of the stuff I write definitely is better than a lot of the stuff that's on the bestseller list, but it'll never get on the bestseller list because unless you have one of the top 4 publishing houses behind you, it's very consolidated now, or you have a major podcast that's pushing you, you're going to be out there, but it's going to be a limited audience. So you do the best you can. Try not to be pretentious about what kind of impact I have. I think the work is high quality. I'm not ashamed of it or anything. It's not. I don't consider myself a vanity writer. I don't know if that's all I did, whether I could make a living at it. But as part of my job, it's kind of perfect right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the impact, we tend to lose sight of it sometimes. Even impacting one person can have a significant effect. So it's all about perspective. But what I'm also hearing from you is your parents laid a foundation for you, being working class themselves, a certain work ethic, something that you can look up to. And the reason why I say this, because my parents also immigrated to Canada. So I grew up watching them working hard, which instilled in me the ability to work hard as well and look up to them as I was going to university. And when you start encountering challenges, it's good to fall back on some of the things you learned growing up. So that definitely helped me. Now, there's this other aspect around the working class where I think when we were talking before, both Canada and the US, I would say fairly similar. Maybe the US is probably a bit ahead in this, but we don't value the working class as much as we used to, or the work ethic. And I think we've dispensed with it altogether. Now, there can be many reasons, the technological evolution or the industrial revolution that we've come across and that's taken over. It doesn't reward you as much, perhaps. And then just in general, there's a generational gap as well. But I'm curious to understand from your perspective, what are you seeing? And if you are seeing the same type of implications around the working class and not valuing them as much and perhaps not even helping them to succeed in a way.
Well, it's interesting. See, value to me turns out to be a question of power.
Yeah.
When the trade union movement was accelerating in the United States, late 1930s, 1940s into the mid 1950s, more than a third of the private sector workers in the United States were in unions, probably even more in Canada, and there was power there. They had to be taken seriously. I think the value of workers was high because you were paying them. They were doing it through collective bargaining. There were a lot of strikes. There was a battle going on to increase the standard of living. And in that period, from World War II all the way to the mid-1970s, the standard of living of the average working person rose and rose and rose. But then there was a transformation in the economy, not so much technological, although that in part of it, but there was a transformation that some people refer to as financialization. But between the Great Crash in 1929 and the end of the 1960s, end of 1970s, really,
Mhm.
finance industry was tightly controlled because it was understood that when it's decontrolled, it causes problems. And like the crash of 1929, as a matter of fact, given your background and skills, your pay on Wall Street and your pay in the private sector and any other business was about the same. There was no premium for working on Wall Street. There was matter of fact, it was sort of that, a more cushy job. But you couldn't make billions of dollars on Wall Street. Very few people did. That changed a lot in the United States, especially during the Reagan administration, then again in Bill Clinton's administration. And there was this constant pressure to deregulate. And that led to all kinds of things, like the deregulation of trade, which was very profitable for Wall Street and for corporations, led to, decimation of many factories in the Midwest of the United States. And I'm sure in the southern tier of Canada as well. Plants disappeared. There was financial consolidation. Assets were basically stripped off, turned into Wall Street money. And workers' unions started collapsing in terms of how many they represented. So we went from 35% in the private sector down to 6% now. So I can tell you, when that happens, workers are not going to be valued.
Right.
They get valued when they have power. And now we're in a situation, and this is what I'm really focused on, whether the economy is doing well or whether it's not doing well, mass layoffs are taking place all the time to satisfy the needs of Wall Street. Every corporation of any size now has two kinds of products. One are the goods and services that it produces. The other is something called stock buybacks, where it takes its money, buys back its own shares without changing anything else in the company. That automatically raises the value of the shares, and the Wall Street investors and the CEOs cash in. They did something called stock manipulation, but it was deregulated in 1982.
Yeah.
And now all corporations do it, and to pay for this, it leads to layoff after layoff after layoff. The work is being devalued again and again and again. And until there's some organized mass movement to stop it, it's going to continue. I don't see anything standing in the way. So kind of the difficulty now of getting, your question opens up this whole Pandora's box about, how does work get valued?
Yeah.
If it's valued and working people have a chance enough to help value it.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to the corporation side of it for sure, and the value that's being put on for the workers and the skills they're bringing. But how much of it's also been influenced by cheap labor, by outsourcing and getting a lot of the work done overseas? Is that a factor that plays in? Because then you can easily you could get the work done, and then you're not developing the skills locally also.
Right. So I think that the framework to use is the framework of deregulation. So once you deregulate labor laws and labor rights, then it becomes very easy to outsource. There's no penalty for hiring workers and then not paying them. Eventually you might get caught. But there are millions of workers who get cheated on their pay, especially if they're not documented. If they don't have papers, there are all these. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 miles away from Paterson, New Jersey, where they have these temporary hiring facilities, and they take low-wage workers, immigrants, some with papers, some without papers. They don't care, and they send them to the warehouses that Amazon uses, the big box stores use, that are all up and down the New Jersey Turnpike. And they get cheated by the temp agency. They get cheated. They sometimes don't get their pay. What are they going to do? How are they going to complain? Fortunately, there's a group in New Jersey called New Labor that's been organizing them and has gotten laws passed to help. Now those laws have to be enforced, but very few states have anything remotely like protecting those workers. In terms of shooting it overseas, NAFTA, China into the World Trade Organization, these things could have happened in a much different way. You just want to open the door and say, you want to pay $20 for somebody in Michigan or in Sarnia, or do you want to pay $1.20 in maquiladoras in Mexico. So, it became an impossible situation. There should have been they should have said, okay, you want to move to Mexico to make goods for Mexicans? Fine. But if you want to re-import it, we're going to put a tariff on that.
Yeah.
A wage equalization tariff. We're going to take wages out of competition. We're not going to say you can't have a factory in Mexico. We're just saying you can't use that to then, re-import at using labor that's much less expensive. So this deregulatory thing makes it very difficult to enforce the very basics of labor law. And outsourcing, when unions are strong, it's hard to outsource. Only when unions are weak can you get away with outsourcing. Otherwise, if it's a unionized plant, they're going to fight it. They're going to say, you're not going to do that. You have to, without negotiating, you can't just take half the plant and move it, outsource it. Very complicated situation, but I'm pretty convinced that as the power of trade unions goes down, the number of situations of the kind you described increase. Low wage labor will be exploited. Very difficult to stop it. It's very hard to get enough enforcement. It just is. I maybe a little better in Canada, smaller population, but in the United States, it's like it's chaos in terms of exploiting low wage labor. Yeah. And they call it wage theft. It's like a thing. Wage theft happens a lot.
So do you feel like this could potentially change under the Trump administration? Because I feel like during his first term, that was at least a focus around supporting the working class. But often when these policies are implemented, they have a different effect, or if they're even implemented. So I'm curious to understand your view on whether or not you do think there would be a shift under his administration.
I think what's going to happen is going to weaken labor law strength. I think to watch the first place to watch is who is he going to point to? The U.S. National Labor Relations Board, because they're the ones that make rulings about elections for unions, people being fired for labor organizing illegally. They make the rules also about the wage theft issues. And if he puts in right now, look, one good thing Biden did was he put very good people in those particular jobs. They're all going to be removed. So if you're going to put in working class fighters, or are they going to put in people who are going to side with the corporation? I'm guessing it's going to be the latter. So this way, I'd be shocked if it weren't the latter. The rhetoric from the new Republicans about supporting the working class is yet to be proven. In other words, are they going to fight to stop plant closings? I mean, they say that it's not right to move American jobs overseas, et cetera. But will they actually do something to stop it? There wasn't much of that in Trump's first administration. There was one case, carrier conditioning, that he stepped in and did something about. That was right during his transition. Actually, right this minute, I'm trying to convince another union to go ask Trump to put a tariff on a plant that's about to move 1,500 jobs out of the country. But I don't know if I can convince them to go talk to Trump, because they're squeamish about it. But I don't know. I'm not optimistic. And the reason I'm not optimistic is not just because of Trump. That's enough reason, because you never know what he's going to do. I don't see a good mobilization yet of working people. Mm-hmm. I don't see. One of the things I'm trying to do right this very minute, actually, is I'm trying to put on the agenda Wall Street-induced layoffs. Mm-hmm. These needless layoffs that are caused purely by Wall Street greed. And it's not on the Democratic Party's agenda. It's certainly not on the Republican Party's agenda. And it's not even on the agenda of a lot of the more progressive people. And I don't understand what the resistance is, partly because they haven't heard about it and they haven't seen the data yet. So I'm doing these surveys of working people, paying for, real surveys of like 1,000 working class people in Pennsylvania, and finding out what they think about this problem, and would they support some proposals that would do something about it. But that has to happen first. But once that happens, then you could test the Trump people and say, do you support this proposal? This is what people want. Would you support it? And the proposal is kind of simple. It says, if you're getting taxpayer money, you shouldn't have involuntary layoffs of taxpayers. In other words, if you give it, in the United States, this happens in Canada too, but we really happens in the United States. We give a lot of money to corporations. Each year, there's $750 billion in federal contracts that go to corporations. Those corporations should not do stock buybacks, and they should not be laying off the taxpayers whose money they're taking.
Right.
They want to lay them off. It should be done in a voluntary way, through buyout packages. No one, through attrition. No one should be forced to leave. Companies operate that way with their management all the time. They have, they'll say, okay, window's open now for the next 3 months. You can get 1 year's pay plus health benefits for 2 years if you agree to leave the company. But they don't force you out. They just put the package on the table, see how many people take it, and then they take it off. And people close to retirement usually jump on it, et cetera. So that ought to be for all working people. I just polled Pennsylvania, and 59% of working class people believe that should be, that they would strongly support that bill if it were on a state ballot as a referendum for state law. They support it. States throw in more money as well.
Right.
People sense that, we've something like 130 million people gone through a layoff in the last 25 years. It's a big deal here. People are being churned all the time, and we've all gotten used to it. People say, well, that's just the way it is. You can do something about it. So I'm trying to peel it back and saying, yeah, there's something you can do about it. You can stop the Wall Street ripoff of your job. Right. And if they want to take your job, that's fine, but then they got to buy you out, and you can say no. Yes. That's the other thing. No one can force you to leave. This happened, by the way. I could take a little tangent here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Siemens is a giant electrical and machinery global, you know well. And they had a division called Siemens Energy, and it was making some kind of compressor, I think, that was used in oil drilling, fracking, and you wanted to get out of that business. So they were laying off 7,000 people around the world, 3,000 in Germany, 1,700 in the United States. They were almost all union jobs in the United States, and they were in fairly rural areas. And they basically just, they had some severance packages, but it was compulsory layoffs across the board, while 17 people were done. In Germany, where they have co-determination, meaning that half the seats on the board of directors are held by workers, and the tiebreaker goes to the CEO, who's elected by everybody else. So the CEO is kind of a little mindful of doing what the labor unions want. There, they agreed, after much negotiation, much research, they agreed on no compulsory layoffs, only voluntary layoffs. And on top of that, the 6 facilities that were going to go down were in kind of small towns around Germany. They agreed, this was a shocker, they agreed to put a new product in those facilities to keep the doors open. And that tells me a bunch of things. One, it tells you something about labor power, union power, but also tells you how flexible these large companies are. When they make a decision, it's not like it's the only decision that they can make. The market is forcing them to do this and only this. No, they have dozens of options, and moving product around. Oh, okay, we just put this product in these 6 plants, and okay, we can get by without forcing these people out. We'll give them a nice buyout package, see how many retire, see how many want to go to another job anyway, and take the package, and the rest we'll find a place for them to work. It's just not. It's so sad that didn't even come up. Let me give you another example, which is probably near and dear to your heart, about new technology.
Yeah,
we hear now that AI is going to just rip through the workforce and just lay off everybody. And pretty soon I'll be talking to a robot who will be interviewing me, and it won't be you. And it won't even be me. It'll be an AI version of me.
Yeah.
Already they're running out of AI is feeding on itself now. So it's like creating junk, but that's okay. So back in, again, question of the power of working people. When labor unions represented 35% of working class, there was a big congressional hearing on automation in the 1950s, 1955 or so, 54. And everyone was concerned about automation then, because during World War II, with a labor shortage, engineers like you were brilliant in figuring out ways to redesign the process. There was a huge amount of pressure, but they also had tons of money to experiment with things. So they figured out how to move those, weapons through the assembly line so much faster than ever before. Then after World War II, the question started to be raised is, what are we going to do with all these workers when they come back? We don't need the same number in heavy industry. We don't need the same number in light industry. So they had these hearings, and this I found just stunning. And they literally were saying, well, there's two things that can happen. And they had labor people there, government people, and corporate people. And one thing that could happen is the automation could continue. There could be, increase in unemployment, but the prices of goods would go down for sure. The other is it could be used to reduce labor time. You reduce and in the hearing they said, well, the work week used to be 70 hours, then it went down to 60 hours, then we got down to 48 hours, now it's 40 hours, maybe it should be 32. Yeah, and this was in the 50s. Now, I ask you, have you heard one person yet say that AI could be fantastic because it could give us so much more free time? Instead of working, 60 hours a week with overtime, we could work 35 hours a week and have a huge amount of free with the same pay.
Yeah.
The same pay. Nobody talks about that anymore. And the reason we're not talking about it is because labor is weak. Trade unions were strong. They'd force that conversation. They said, no, you're not laying us off.
Yeah.
We want more time off.
Yeah.
And there's again, I keep coming back to this point is another reason to care about labor. It's the only set of organizations that can help all of our lives get better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to close it off with the trade union part. But before we get there, I do want to dive a bit deeper into the corporation side because you touched on it in numerous times and the stock buybacks. So the idea here is, unfortunately, it's coming at the cost of the labor force, the working class. Meanwhile, the shareholders and the corporations are getting richer, and then the Wall Street people that are invested in the companies are getting richer through these processes. And you often see this, it's almost like a cyclical nature. This is something you and I had chatted about too, is these corporations will go through hiring frenzies, and then we could throw a number there, but like every 4 or 5 or even every 10 years, then they downsize through the mass layoffs, as you touched on it. To me, it would seem like it's very intentional, but I'm wanting to understand from your perspective, why do corporations do that? And what's the game perhaps that's going on behind the scenes?
The cyclical nature of that is gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cyclical. It's constant now.
Okay.
So here, just to make sure your listeners are understanding what a stock buyback is. A stock buyback is when a corporation takes its own money or borrows money, goes into the stock market and repurchases its own shares and basically makes them disappear. That means every share out there, whatever earnings the company has, the earnings per share, which is the value of the stock, has connected to that, goes up. Because there are now fewer shares and there's the same amount of earnings. On top of that, when you go into the stock market and purchase back your shares, you have to bid up the price or no one's going to sell it to you. So that puts upward pressure as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's as Senator Elizabeth Warren in the United States, she calls it, you get a sugar high.
Yeah.
The company gets a sugar high.
Yeah.
The price of the share automatically increases. Now, why does this happen? That's the mechanism, but the why is very interesting. In the United States in the last 40 years, this whole new group of people have grown up. It's called like the shadow banking community, but it's hedge funds and private equity companies that have amassed large amounts of investor money. And what they do, this is just phenomenal, they will gang up on a company. They will find a particular corporation and they will buy up a lot of the shares, and then they demand a stock buyback. If they don't get the stock buyback, they threaten the managers of the company by, we're going to go to a stockholders meeting. We've got enough shares that we're going to put our own people on the board, and you might get voted out. So what happens every time virtually is there's a negotiated settlement, They get a couple of people on the board to watch things, and then they come up with a plan to do stock buybacks. Right now, we're working with some workers at Phillips 66, and they're shutting down their Los Angeles area refinery. And the company, a year ago, a large hedge fund that has $65 billion of assets, bought $1 billion worth of Phillips 66 stock and sat down with them and said, okay, now what are we going to do to make our investment worthwhile? And they agreed on a huge number of stock buybacks, and they're going to shut down this facility because the property is very valuable along the coast of Los Angeles, along the Pacific coast, and they're going to sell it off to developers, and they're going to have extra cash flow to deal with the stock buybacks. This is going on in tens of thousands of companies. Matter of fact, almost every mass layoff you see in the United States, more than 20, 30 people, you're going to see a stock buyback in their background. And it's now happening to companies that never laid anybody off. Google, Alphabet. This is a stunning thing. We got a call from a group. There's a group in Alphabet are you a software engineer or just a regular engineer? Mechanical engineer, electrical engineer?
Regular, yeah, mechanical.
Okay. Well, these were basically, software engineers. Average pay, $200,000. They formed a kind of a proto-union of 1,000 members, they each paying dues. And they called up and my book, Wall Street's War on Workers, is about mass layoffs. And they got a hold of it and they said, we want your group to design an educational program for us because for the first time ever, we're going through mass layoffs. And we can't believe how can one of the most prosperous companies in the history of the world be laying us off? What happened? And they have huge numbers of stock buybacks. And, look, you're right. There was definitely some overhiring, quote unquote, going on during the pandemic in certain industries that had to gear up. Even those industries, Google is so prosperous, Alphabet and Facebook, and they'd never have to do a compulsory layoff. Surely they could put financial packages on the table, and some of the younger take it. Some of the people that think they have good marketable skills might go someplace else, or they just might hang on and say, no, we're not going. You can't force us out. Mm-hmm. They can easily do that. But, that's not the way the game works. But the long and the short of it is, this is now embedded in every single corporate mind. And Wall Street's game is to squeeze these companies for every last penny through stock buybacks and then lay off people. And the other way they do it is through what are called leverage buyouts. They buy a company up with maybe 5-10% of their own money and the rest of it's borrowed money. And as soon as they buy up the company, almost every time they lay off workers to help service the new debt. This is what happened with Twitter, now called X. When Elon Musk bought Twitter for a very large sum of borrowed money, not just his own, the debt service for Twitter went from $50 million a year to $1.2 billion. He immediately laid off 5,000 workers to pay for the. He says, I got to do this. How do we make ends meet? Well, the ends meeting is him blaming the debt on the company, right? So this is, when we ask, it's interesting. I don't like to use, words like greed and sort of moralistic terms, but, because I'm trying to be a more objective instructor. All right, I would get into the workshop and we pose the question about, what caused this big change? I'm hoping we'll talk about deregulation and this and that. No, they all say the same thing, greed. Mm-hmm. And what happened was when they changed the rules, when they took their foot off the neck of Wall Street, it made it like fed our greed genes, because now it was possible to make wild sums of money very, very quickly on the unethical, sometimes illegal side of the ledger. But it was right there. And the people with a will to power, ambition, you've met the types, they just dove in and they're still diving in. I asked a friend of mine, works on Wall Street. He's going to retire soon. But he's very honest. And I asked him why this guy, he once worked with this guy Schwartzman from BlackRock hedge fund, who's already worth, several $billion, 10, 20, I don't know. He's worth a lot. Mm-hmm. He said, why does he still do it? He says, it's the game.
Yeah.
He couldn't stop doing it. He wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So, because there's always another billionaire you can get ahead of. There's always another deal to do. And what they never think about, they can't think about, are the average working people that are getting crushed at the other end of the deal.
Yeah.
They have to talk themselves, and this is where it gets very tricky. They have to talk themselves into thinking that what's good for me is good for them. What's good for the Wall Street people is good for everybody. Because once that equation is tinkered with, then it gets to be kind of bleak. Except, look, there are some Wall Street people who actually will admit that what they're doing isn't right. But it'll always be right until they're stopped.
Right.
We almost had them stopped. We didn't have a movement big enough. When the crash happened in 2008, 2009, these Wall Street titans were in trouble. The game that they had played, the deregulatory game that they had played, I wrote a whole book on this called Looting of America. The financial instruments that they created were out of complete thin air. It was gambling of the highest order. And it was just like before the great crash of 1929, all kinds of funny securities that had nothing in them, manipulating them. It was just awful. And then it crashed. Yeah, and they got bailed out. They didn't go to jail. The homeowners didn't get bailed out or at the other end of the deal.
Yeah.
And that actually led to politics starting to deteriorate in the United States. That was the rise of it. First, there was we are the 99% and the Occupy Wall Street and Bernie Sanders campaign, but also the Tea Party and the rise of Trump out of, hey, you got screwed. So this corporate side of it, this is what I concentrate on. Can I help explain to the average working person, the average person, period, how the game is being played? And I have to constantly check myself to make sure I know how the game is being played. So I've got, talk to people who know more than I do, write the academic papers, who work on Wall Street. I try, I've got people that do error checking on me all the time, but I think we're pretty close to accurate. America has leading the world in producing two products, its goods and services, and stock buybacks. That's as important to them as anything else. Why? Because CEOs get like 85 to 90% of their pay comes from stock incentives. So if you can artificially jack up the price, cash in some of those shares, that's how you get rich as a CEO. And of course, the Wall Street firms are all over, company after company. You just go for like a attacking wolf pack, go from one to the other, gang up, demand the stock buyback. And they always get it.
Yeah.
I've yet to see a company say, no, we're not doing it, go away.
Yeah. There's something you touched on, which to me is almost philosophical or like purpose driven to a certain extent, but this whole corporate greed, you think about it, it's for them, it's like never enough, right? And it's like when you think about someone being addicted to a substance, after a while, it takes you to take more quantity of that substance to get the same hit or the same high. And it's the same idea here from that greed perspective, that you made your first 100 million. Now you need more to feel the same level of fulfillment, because that's what you've assigned value to as an individual in your life, right? And that's why I think it's a bit philosophical in nature, because what are you assigning value to? Right. And my exploration in the spiritual realm, I found at the end of the day, what you're able to assign value to is what brings you fulfillment. And when you're chasing this greed, it's going to make you feel empty at the end of the day. There's not enough money in the world that could ever make you feel fulfilled. So I wonder where, if that greed is driving you, it's never going to be enough. That's just my view. But some time I've spent thinking about why people get addicted to that greed as well.
Well, you're bringing up some great points. I'm actually not deep enough into their world to know whether or not there's a hollowness inside people who are going for it. I had the opportunity to work alongside a bunch of these folks when they were younger. I was in some political campaigns where there were people like Bill Clinton and others who became obviously very famous and very successful. And he wasn't one of them that that I was all that worried about it. But I met some other people there that I thought, oh man, these folks are just hustlers. You know, right now they're hustling at an anti-Vietnam War political campaign, but they'll hustle anywhere and they did. They flipped over to the other side. All kinds of things happened. Some of them, you know, a lot of them were decent people and still are decent people, but I could see there was this other kind. But the thing you're touching on really is what I saw as the ethos of the 1960s. I thought the epitome of this was, if you remember the movie The Graduate, starring Dustin Hoffman, there's one point where he's sleeping with his neighbor's wife, right? He's seduced by the neighbor's wife, right? Mrs. Robinson. And he's sitting with the husband, and the husband's saying, I've got only one thing to say to you. And Dustin Hoffman's like sweating bullets. You know, what is he going to say? And he says, plastics. And the whole audience in every theater laughs and laughs and laughs. Part of it's relief that he didn't bash him over the head, but it represented the anti-1960s ethos, that somehow you could spend your life. What do you want to be when you grow up? What's your career? It's going to be in plastics. And I think a lot of us alienated in the 1960s about the Vietnam War, alienated about the problems of civil rights and discrimination and women's rights and so on. There was a sense, you're touching on this. It's funny. I don't use the word spiritual, but a lot of us just thought, and I really thought, that there had to be things more important than just making money.
Yeah.
But you had to get fulfillment some other way. You know, as I've gotten older, I want everybody to be able to have enough money. They're not scrambling. They're not living from paycheck to paycheck. They can take care of their kids and have enough material goods to not feel impoverished. But the race for a never-ending amount of money, I still feel bad about purchases of things because I feel that I fall into the consumer trap, and that's part of this downward slide of value. I mean, I think you're right to use the word value. So, your value comes from doing fulfilling things. And to me, fulfillment always had something to do with trying to make the world a little bit better, a little fairer. And I'm wide open to the millions of ways that can happen. I try not to be judgmental about what other people do, because I've had a lot of breaks. I got never got a good education. As part of the generation where things were opening up, I got lucky to, I get this little fly-by-night organization together and still going. I earned a comfortable living, and now I write books. I've got a lot of things going, so I don't want to tell you or somebody else, you got to change your life, right, and help others. But a lot of people do help others, and a lot of people would be willing to be involved in some sort of broader collective effort to make the world fair and just. And if those opportunities come up, I would urge people to look at them very carefully, because I think it does bring some fulfillment. But you described it perfectly. I think the chase after never-ending material goods is going to, it's a sugar, it's a high that gets worse and worse and worse. But how you get this fulfillment, that's a real complicated process for each individual. Some people just seem to have the grace almost by birth that they find it and they're comfortable in their own skins. Others of us, it's more of a struggle. But it's not, I see it in my kids. I kind of, feel really good about it. I see it in my wife. That's why I was attracted to her. And I've seen it in a lot of other people. And when I don't see it, I kind of back away because I already know that there's a lot of, I'm in it for myself kind of stuff. And if you're only in it for yourself, see, that's the greed and the ego become attached.
Correct. Yeah. And then to your point around not being judgmental, I agree with you, because in some of the explorations I've done or tried to understand these personalities, a lot of the times they've convinced themselves that they're doing it for the greater good as well. So it's interesting to see that, because for whatever reason, they're convinced that, hey, I'm trying to make the world a better place. I don't understand why others don't see it this way. So they're coming at it perhaps from also good intentions, or at least they've convinced themselves their intentions are good, but it's, at the end of the day, how is it coming across, or how is it being reflected? It's a really interesting phenomenon when you try to sit down and try to understand and not be judgmental, perhaps have a little bit of compassion. It doesn't mean you have to accept what they're doing, but you can try to at least understand where they're coming from, even though it may not be right. Now, yeah.
The flip side of that story is this guy I knew, because our kids were on the same little junior soccer team or something. And he was a private equity guy. And he was merging a bunch of radio stations together. And very nice guy, very honest. I said, Reggie, that's kind of cool, right? You're doing that. It's going to be a good way to actually save some jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Like stronger media companies. He looked at me and just sort of smiled. And he said, no, Les, I'm in it for the money. Mm-hmm. He just, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he wasn't going to BS himself or me. So I actually think he's probably going to end up, he could be like my friend, Tom, who's actually, I met them both together. I was going to write a book about the two of them. They're going to retire early and they're going to get out of the game, because I think they see there's a certain hollowness to it. They don't want to go down with the ship. But look, I can't emphasize enough to anybody who's going through it, is the thing about being a human being is it's really a large part of it is a lonely struggle, right? You have to constantly make these decisions about what you're going to do and how you're going to relate to other people. And there's your emotions, things trigger your emotions. So it's not like you're always being rational about it. You're reacting to things that are happening. It's a complicated business. And to go through it and feel good about yourself and good about the people around you, if that happens, you're fortunate. And hopefully the people that could do that should be around others as a good model.
And you're right. It's an individual journey. And I was writing a piece on people who live with the truth, and it brings forward this quote from Plato around, I think he said, I'm going to paraphrase here, but no man is hated more than the one who speaks the truth. Right. It is a lonely journey when you do decide to speak up against the establishment or the system. And sometimes it's just easier to comply and follow along. And again, like I said earlier, you can have sympathy for individuals who fall into that trap. And speaking of, you've highlighted a significant issue within Wall Street. And I'm curious to understand, because the SEC's mandate is to at least police stuff like this. So where do you feel like they're falling short in their...
They're the ones that changed the rule. 1982, there was a rule that limited stock buybacks to only no more than 2% of corporate profits. That's it. You know what it is today? Across the country, on average, 68% of every corporate dollar in profits is going to stock buybacks. Some companies do more than 100% of their profits. They go into debt and move all their profits and then some over. So the SEC is responsible for it, and they could change it again, but don't. This goes back to your other, I think, important question. Our courage to speak out. I find myself sometimes, cautious, because I don't want to be out there all by myself. But when we're part of a more collective enterprise, a community that wants to change things, then I think our courage grows. Not to be fanatics or anything, but just grows enough to say, put pressure on the political system, the SEC, to change the rule back to what it was. Okay, you don't have to do it overnight. Do it over a 10-year period. Each year, 2%, go from 2 to 5 to 10 to 20. Just keep doing it. And there were corporate billionaires who think stock buybacks are wrong. But it's going to require the United States, it's going to, what I'm hoping to show, this is where I kind of am really out there all by myself. It's a very strange feeling. And I got to remind myself, not let my ego get in the way, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a lack of understanding of the depth of this problem, how big it is, how big an impact that layoffs are having on our whole political society, and what remedies might look like. It's not on the agenda. Mm-hmm. So my goal, the reason I'm going on these podcasts and other ones, besides you're a very decent person and it's a pleasure talking to you, but I want to try to put Wall Street induced mass layoffs on the agenda and what to do about it. Mm-hmm. No compulsory layoffs. If you have the money to do billions of dollars in stock buybacks, surely you can put a little bit of that money, 1/4 of a year's worth of your stock buybacks, into a fund that would provide money for people that you want to lay off, packages for them, financial healthcare packages for them, but make them voluntary. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy that we are pushing people around like this. And somehow we think this is good for them. They hate it.
Yeah.
Who likes having this gets into another mental health issue. There are really good studies that show that being laid off from your job is highly traumatic event. Apparently the 7th most traumatic event in your life. Let me see if I can get the exact number for you without wasting time. It's more stressful than divorce, a sudden or serious impairment of hearing or vision, or the death of a close friend. It even impacts the fetus of pregnant women. It kicks up the suicide rate, substance abuse, all kinds of stress-related diseases that show up. Mm-hmm. And how did I find out that this is remotely true? I didn't start with the studies. My college, my undergraduate college, Oakland College in Ohio, in the middle of the pandemic, decided to outsource 114 union jobs, who were the janitors and the food maintenance people. The bottom of the blue collar ladder. Just tossed them out. Those workers, we had some interns that interviewed them, were so upset, so brokenhearted, but also like this one woman who couldn't sleep. This other woman, she couldn't drive through the town without throwing up. I mean, it was like her life was destroyed. They'd been there 15, 20, 25 years. One guy, literally did not have enough food anymore. He was a single parent for his children. And, he had to go to food banks now. I mean, this was like a collapse of their world. That got me thinking, how big a problem is this? Just that's college, or is it just going all over the place? I found that it was a huge problem. And that led to the Wall Street's War on Workers book and to my Substack by the same name. So this is serious. Yeah. So that, if you can't look in our kind of economy, as far as I don't know if there is any other kind that's even possible, but in a capitalist economy, you got to have a job.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're on welfare and you're really in trouble. You got to have a job to feel good about yourself. There are very few people. I know one who can survive without working. He's a graduate from Yale. He was in the same secret society as President George Bush. And he's just a happy-go-lucky guy who's been able to, gone through life without getting welfare or having any kind of jobs, little odd jobs every now and then. He's very happy. But I know nobody else has been able to do that. My sense of self-worth is the work I do.
Yeah.
In large part.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so we can mass layoffs, Wall Street induced mass layoffs. We got to do something about it because it's contributing to a mental health problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to close it off, you've talked about the union piece, which I think there's an aspect there too. But because we're so divided, I'm wondering, is that preventing people from also working together? So I do want to end the episode here where we can talk about what can people do as the working class. What are some things they can do to take matters into their own hands and influence some of the things you've talked about?
That's the question. I think anybody that is in a position to organize a new union should do so. That's one thing. I think that there should be we need some sort of extra union working class organization that focuses on this Wall Street-induced mass layoffs. I think people would come running. It's got to be independent of the major parties in the United States. I have a little knowledge of Canada, but not enough to open my mouth about it.
Yeah.
You'd have to figure out whether any of the parties would work there, or if you need to start something new. In the States, we definitely need to start something new to gather working people together, make them feel part of something, and protect their own livelihoods. It's a tall task. I've been kind of working on something like this my whole life, and it's going in the other direction. But, it's funny. This one person I know asked me, how can you maintain any optimism given everything that's going on? And I said, I don't know. I just know that, somehow or another, my life got significantly better than my parents. And I think my kids are going to lead a decent life. And more people should have that opportunity. And it seems to me that that awareness is going to grow. It could take another 50 or 100 years, but if you're going to keep wiping out people's jobs, at some point they're going to say enough.
Yeah.
They're going to say enough. And so I urge people to try to work within their labor organizations and begin a conversation about what are we going to do about, Wall Street-induced, financially induced mass layoffs, unneeded layoffs.
Yeah.
How do we get some job stability? How do we get rid of compulsory layoffs? I think if people focus just on that kind of question, it would bring people together. These other divisions, when you're talking about somebody's livelihood, all of a sudden there's a common denominator there that links us together. If you're having trouble holding on to your job, I'm having trouble holding on to my job. We think it's not fair. We have something to talk about.
Yes.
Regardless of what other differences may be. We now have something not only that we talk about, but immediately we understand that a lot of us have to get together to stop it. Otherwise it'll just keep going on and on and on.
Yeah. No, thank you for all of that, Les. I really appreciate it. Now, for listeners who want to find your work, I know you've touched on your books, you've touched on your Substack. What are some ways they can find your work if they wanted to learn more?
Our educational curriculum is in Spanish and English. You can get it for free at Runaway Inequality, all one word, Runaway Inequality, put it all together in one word, .org. And that everything will pop up. That's the easiest way to get there. And every now and then they're virtually giving my book away on Amazon. The other day it was like $5.60 or something. Now it's back up to 11 or whatever. Yes. But I think your viewers and listeners would enjoy it. Wall Street's War on Workers. But feel free to take whatever materials you can get off our website. It's a very extensive curriculum. I mean, it's like 100 pages long, so illustrated. And feel free to take it.
Awesome. I will definitely put that in the show notes for the listeners to find. But Les, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the work you're doing and your passion. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.